Cotton.
Mr. Carvajal, you just revisited with Senator Durbin, exchange you had with Senator Grassley, so I want to revisit it as well about CARES Act home confinement. So under the CARES Act, the BOP received extraordinary authority to put into home confinement prisoners who would otherwise not be eligible for home confinement under prior law. Is that correct? And
Yes.
And your testimony is that when the emergency period expires, the Bureau no longer has authority to keep those prisoners in home confinement. Is that correct?
What I stated, Senators, as written, the statute for home confinement and our policies, it is a reentry transitional program made for 10% at a time or 6 months in home confinement, up to 12 months community placement. There are several inmates currently on home confinement under CARES Act who will fall outside that guideline. In order for us to apply the statute appropriately, we need the guidance, or it needs to be changed. That's what I was trying to explain.
And you said you have about 4,500 persons under home confinement now who
Currently on CARES Act.
who would otherwise not be there, but are there because of the CARES Act.
At this point in time in their incarceration, they would not be because of that. Doesn't mean they wouldn't be eligible at some point.
Yes. And I understand, too, that some of those who are lawfully under home confinement because of the CARES Act will time into eligibility for home confinement under the prior law, 10% of the sentence, 60 months, whichever is lesser. That's correct.
That is correct. About 2,400 of them are over a year, so half, roughly 50%. If you extend that out to 18 months, it drops the number to about 1,800. And the reason I say that is we could work with a plan. We're working with DOJ. Part of our recommendation would be working with something like that. Again, I stated earlier, we want these people to be successful. They're coming back to our community, obviously, or we wouldn't have put them out. So to bring them back for 2 or 3 or 4 months, we would take that into consideration. But again, we work within the law. So all of those things need to be, we are working with DOJ on recommendations on how to do that should the need arise.
But surely for that segment of that population that has years left in their confinement, it can't be the Bureau's position or the department's position that they can now stay on home confinement just because they had the good fortune of being released to it during the pandemic.
Well,
or
Senator,
to use the statutory phrase, during the covered emergency period, once that period ends.
I understand, Senator. That's why I'm asking the question. That's why we're trying to clarify this. There's roughly 310 with over 5 years who met the criteria. Obviously, they're low risk or we wouldn't have placed them out. But in order to be compliant with statute, we have to address that. That's simply what we're saying.
I agree, and I think the statute is perfectly clear on that. I want to turn to one of the most pernicious problems that I believe you face and that our state and local prisons and jails face as well, and that's the problem of contraband cell phones. The Inspector General has listed this as one of your Bureau's top challenges, something that I've heard about repeatedly from our corrections officers and sheriffs in Arkansas. And the reason for that is, of course, that the contraband cell phone enables every other kind of contraband, weapons and drugs and anything else. These cell phones are sometimes used to run massive drug trafficking rings or order murders, extort people, intimidate witnesses. I'll give you just a couple of examples. One, the family of Joseph Michael Wood, an inmate in a maximum security prison in Alabama. Inmates used contraband cell phones to extort his family, demanding money to guarantee his safety after his family had had enough and refused to answer. Mr. Wood was murdered. Another example was the family of correctional officer Osvaldo Albarati, who was murdered in a hit directed by inmates through contraband cell phones. His offense in their eyes, he'd been performing his job and confiscating contraband cell phones. I've introduced in the last Congress, and I'll introduce again soon, and I hope to have bipartisan support, the Cell Phone Jamming Reform Act. It would explicitly make clear that state prisons can use targeted jamming to block cell phone signals in prison housing units. I've been disappointed at the telecom companies' resistance to this legislation, but I hope they're going to come to their senses as more of these cases arise. Could you tell us, Director Carvajal, what steps the Bureau is taking to address this issue, and in particular, pilot programs you had and what you've learned from those pilot programs?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Pre-COVID, if you would have asked me the question what our number one problem is, we always answered drugs, drones, and cell phones. They're all connected, as you alluded to, so it's a severe problem. We appreciate the support from Congress in our budget. We got appropriated approximately $12 million to conduct some pilots. We have 2 ongoing now. One of them is at FCI Edgefield. It is a pilot for managed access, which is one of the types. And then, as you mentioned, jamming, we have a pilot ongoing at USP Atlanta and then part of our Florence complex. We're also going to use some of that funding designated to jam a complex. I don't remember off my head which complex, but that's multiple institutions. So it's very much helpful. The reason we're running multiple pilots on different is, again, federal government, certainly you're aware of that. We have to be fair and assess these. That's what the point of the pilot is. Depends on who you talk to of which technology is better or not. But we certainly appreciate the support, and it is a severe problem.
Yeah, and I'll be eager to hear all the results of those pilots and to share them with state officials. I know the telecom industry has advocated for so-called managed access
Yes.
technology, and I would leave it in the hands of state officials to make their decisions. But I want to point out a third case in which a South Carolina prison was using a managed access program, and still a contraband cell phone was used in a blackmail scheme that ultimately resulted in a needless death. So to me, the easiest way to solve this problem is just to jam these cell phones. So I appreciate the work you're doing on this, and that you will share with the Congress and share with state counterparts. Also want to thank you and all of your officers. I've been at the facility at Forest City. It's an incredibly difficult job, one of the worst, or one of the toughest jobs in some of the worst conditions we have with truly violent offenders. And I want to commend you and all the men and women that work in the Bureau for your service to our country. Thank you.
Thank you.